November 4th, 1942. Murmansk Harbor, Soviet Union. 14 degrees below zero. Captain Dmitry Volkov's breath crystallizes in the Arctic air as he watches the American Liberty ship edge toward the dock. Ice chunks grind against the hull, but the vessel pushes forward, steady and deliberate. Volkov has been a supply officer for the Red Army for 18 months now. He's counted rifles, boots, ammunition crates. He's watched soldiers march toward the front with barely enough to sustain them. He signed requisition forms knowing they'd never be filled. This is different. The ship's name is painted in English letters across the bow. SS John Barry. Volkov doesn't speak English, but he doesn't need to. He's here for what's inside. The cargo manifest in his hands lists numbers that don't make sense. 15,000 tons. On one ship. He's seen supply columns that carried less for an entire division's monthly ration. Longshoremen, Soviet and American both, swarm the docks as the ship secures. Steam rises from their coats. The Americans move with an efficiency that Volkov finds almost unsettling. Everything seems planned, coordinated. When Soviet supply chains work, it's because someone improvised brilliantly. When American supply chains work, it's because someone planned brilliantly. The first crane swings a cargo net loaded with wooden crates onto the dock. Volkov approaches as workers pry one open with crowbars. Inside, packed in neat rows, are rectangular tins. Dozens of them, hundreds of them. Each one identical. Each one stamped with English words and a blue label. "What is it?" asks Lieutenant Petrov, Volkov's assistant. He's 22. He joined the Red Army in 1941 and hasn't known anything but war. Volkov picks up one of the tins. It's cold, heavier than he expected. The label shows a picture of meat, pink, processed, shaped into a perfect rectangle. The English words mean nothing to him, but the image is clear enough. Meat, in a can, shelf-stable, ready to eat. "Canned meat," Volkov says. He turns it over in his hands. American canned meat. Another crate opens, more tins. Then another, more tins. The crane swings back to the ship and returns with another cargo net. More wooden crates. Volkov's eyes move from the dock to the ship's hold. Cranes are operating on 3 different hatches simultaneously, each one bringing up more crates, each crate containing more tins. You need to understand what 15,000 tons means, not in the abstract, not as a number on paper. Volkov is understanding it now, watching crate after crate stack on the frozen dock. This is one ship out of dozens that have made the Arctic run from America to Murmansk. One shipment out of hundreds that will arrive over the next 3 years. Petrov bends down and picks up a tin. "How many are there?" Volkov consults his manifest. His finger traces down the page, past other items, trucks, aviation fuel, medical supplies. He finds the line item for canned meat. The number makes him stop. He reads it again to be certain. "This ship is carrying 300,000 tins of meat," Volkov says quietly. Petrov looks at the tin in his hand, and then at the growing mountain of crates on the dock. 300,000? Just meat? "Just meat," Volkov confirms. He looks back at the manifest. "Plus dried eggs, powdered milk, butter, sugar, wheat flour." The list continues. Every line contains a number that seems impossible. The SS John Barry isn't even the largest shipment. It's just November. The convoys will keep coming. Around them, workers continue unloading. The pile grows. Volkov has spent months watching Soviet soldiers survive on black bread and thin soup. He's seen men grateful for a handful of grain. The Red Army's logistics system has been stretched past breaking since the German invasion began. Food shortages aren't just common, They're expected, assumed, part of the reality of war on the Eastern Front. And here, stacked on a Murmansk dock, is enough meat to feed a division for weeks, from one ship, delivered by a country 6,000 miles away, a country that isn't even being invaded. Volkov places the tin back in the crate carefully, as if it might break. "Get the trucks ready," he tells Petrov. "All of them. We need to move this south before the Germans find out it's here." Petrov nods and hurries off. Volkov remains, watching the cranes work. The temperature continues dropping as afternoon fades. His fingers are going numb. He doesn't move. He's trying to comprehend what he's seeing, trying to calculate what it means that America can fill ships like this, that they can do it repeatedly, that they can do it while fighting Japan in the Pacific and sending supplies to Britain. The crane swings another load onto the dock. More crates, more tins, more meat that Soviet soldiers haven't seen in months. It takes 3 days to transport the first convoy south from Murmansk. Captain Volkov rides in the lead truck, watching the Arctic landscape roll past. Behind him, 27 trucks loaded with American provisions crawl along frozen roads. The convoy moves at night to avoid Luftwaffe reconnaissance, every vehicle running without headlights, drivers navigating by moonlight reflected off snow. They reach the distribution depot outside Leningrad on November 9th. Volkov has been here before. The warehouse is a converted factory building, half its roof blown away by German artillery in the siege's early days. Temporary sheeting keeps most of the snow out. Most, not all. Sergeant Major Grigory Antonov meets him at the entrance. Antonov is 46 years old, which makes him ancient by Red Army standards. He survived the Finnish Winter War. He survived the first year of the German invasion. He survived because he knows how to make something from nothing, how to stretch supplies that should feed 100 men to somehow feed 300. "What do they send?" Antonov asks, watching the trucks back up to the loading dock. "See for yourself," Volkov says. The first crate comes off the truck. Antonov grabs a crowbar and splits it open. He stops. His weathered hands hover over the contents. Rows of blue-labeled tins, packed so precisely they look machine-made, because they are machine-made. Everything about them speaks to industrial precision that Antonov has never seen in Soviet supplies. He lifts one tin, turns it over, studies the label. "What is this word?" He points to the English letters. SPAM. "American canned meat. Pork. Processed and canned. It doesn't need refrigeration, doesn't spoil. Ready to eat." Antonov pulls out a knife and works it around the tin's edge. The key opener mechanism attached to the bottom confuses him at first, but he figures it out. The tin opens with a metallic tear. Inside, a rectangular block of pink meat, glistening with its own gelatin. The smell hits immediately. Salt, pork, spices unfamiliar to Russian cooking. Other soldiers have gathered now, young men most of them. Fresh replacements pulled from Siberian villages and Ukrainian farms. They've been in the depot for 2 weeks, waiting for assignment to frontline units, waiting and surviving on the standard ration, black bread, thin cabbage soup, occasional dried fish. And now this. Corporal Mikhail Fedorov finds a crate of canned peaches. He opens one and stares at the golden fruit floating in syrup. He's from Georgia, where peaches grow, where his family had an orchard before the war. He hasn't tasted anything sweet in 14 months. He takes a piece of peach from the can, and for a moment he's not in a freezing warehouse outside Leningrad. He's home, summer, 8 years old, stealing fruit from his father's trees. The moment breaks. He's back in the warehouse, but the peach is real. The sweetness is real. "How much of this is there?" Antonov asks Volkov quietly. Around them, soldiers are discovering American provisions like children finding presents. The usual military discipline has dissolved into something resembling wonder. The trucks outside represent 1/10 of what came off one ship. There are more ships, more convoys. This is just the beginning, Volkov says. Antonov looks at the tin of Spam still in his hand, then at the soldiers eating American food with expressions he hasn't seen since the war. Not just gratitude, astonishment. The realization that someone, somewhere, had enough food to can it, ship it 6,000 miles, and send it to people they'd never meet. The Americans did this? Antonov asks. Just gave it to us? Lend-Lease, President Roosevelt's program. They're sending equipment too, trucks, aircraft, weapons. But this, he gestures at the open crates, this is what the soldiers will remember. Private Sokolov has opened 3 different tins now. He's trying everything, sampling flavors he didn't know existed. Canned ham, beef stew, something called cheese spread that comes in a small tin and tastes unlike any cheese he's encountered. Each one is different. Each one is abundant. In America, Sokolov says to no one in particular, do they eat like this every day? No one answers, because none of them know. None of them can conceive of a place where food like this is normal, where factories produce millions of tins of meat not for special occasions, but for everyday consumption, where the industrial capacity exists to feed an army on the other side of the world while simultaneously feeding your own population. Sergeant Major Antonov starts organizing the chaos. Soldiers need to catalog the supplies, create inventory lists, prepare distribution schedules. But he lets them eat first, lets them open tins and taste and marvel. There will be time for logistics. Right now, in this freezing warehouse, Soviet soldiers are discovering that their allies across the ocean have resources beyond imagination. Outside, more trucks arrive from Murmansk, more crates, more provisions. The pile grows, and with it, a slowly dawning realization that changes how these men think about the war, about their chances, about America. December 12, 1942. Frontline position, 40 kilometers west of Stalingrad. Temperature, -18 degrees Celsius. Lieutenant Boris Karpov crouches in a foxhole that was German 3 days ago. The position overlooks a frozen ravine where burned-out panzers sit like metal tombstones. His unit, what remains of the 284th Rifle Division, has been fighting for 11 weeks straight. Of the 180 men in his company at the start, 63 remain. They're waiting for supplies. Always waiting for supplies. A runner appears from the communication trench, sliding into the foxhole beside Karpov. It's Private Alexei Morzov, 17 years old, who looks 50 in the dim light. Supply truck got through, Morzov pants. Sergeant says there's something different this time. Karpov follows him back through the trench system. The supply truck is an American-made Studebaker. Those have been arriving for months now, replacing the broken-down Soviet Gaz trucks. This one idles in a crater that provides cover from German observation posts. The driver and Sergeant Volodya Reznik are unloading wooden crates. "American provisions," Reznik announces. He's grinning, which Karpov hasn't seen in weeks. "Real American food." The sergeant pries open a crate, inside those blue-labeled tins that some soldiers have heard about, but most haven't seen. Reznik pulls one out and tosses it to Karpov. "Spam," Reznik says, pronouncing the English word awkwardly. "Canned pork. They say the Americans eat this like we eat bread." Karpov examines the tin. It's solid, heavy, professionally manufactured. The label has English words and a picture of meat that looks almost too perfect to be real. He's been eating black bread and millet porridge for weeks, sometimes watery soup with bits of horseflesh from dead cavalry horses. Yesterday, his breakfast was a handful of frozen grain and snow melted in his canteen. Other soldiers gather. Word spreads fast in a frontline position, faster than orders, faster than rumors. Food news travels at light speed. Private Igor Pavlov pushes forward. He's from Moscow, used to work in a printing factory before the war. "Let me see that." Karpov hands him the tin. Pavlov studies it like a technical document, examining the seams, the label, the key opener mechanism. "This is machine-made," Pavlov says. "Look at the precision, the sealing. This was manufactured in a factory designed specifically to make these. Not a food factory that got converted, a factory built just for this." "How can you tell?" asks Corporal Dmitry Orlov. "The tolerances," Pavlov explains. "Every tin exactly the same size. Every label perfectly aligned. This is assembly line production, mass production, American mass production." Sergeant Resnick has opened one of the tins. He cuts slices and distributes them. Karpov receives his piece, about 2 ounces of processed pork, glistening with fat and gelatin. He puts it in his mouth. The taste explodes across his tongue. Salt, yes, but also spices he can't identify. The texture is soft, almost uniform, nothing like the tough, stringy meat he's occasionally had. This is meat that was designed to be eaten easily, to provide nutrition without effort. It tastes like abundance, like a country that has so much food it can afford to process it, can it, and ship it around the world. Around him, soldiers are having similar reactions. Private Leonid Kuznetsov, who hasn't smiled since his entire family was killed in Kiev, is eating slowly, reverently. Corporal Orlov has tears in his eyes, though he'll deny it if asked. "There's more," Resnick says. He opens another crate. Canned beef stew. Then another, powdered eggs. Another, white flour. The pile grows. Each crate contains something these men haven't seen in months, or in some cases ever. Private Yuri Belov finds a tin of condensed milk. He opens it and drinks directly from the can. The sweetness overwhelms him. He sits down heavily in the snow, clutching the tin like it might disappear. "How much did they send?" Karpov asks Resnick quietly. "The driver says this is one truck from one warehouse that received one convoy from one American ship. He says the Americans are sending hundreds of ships, millions of tons." Karpov looks at the tin in his hand, then at his soldiers eating American food with expressions of disbelief, and then at the frozen steppes stretching west toward German lines. The Wehrmacht is trapped in Stalingrad now, encircled, slowly freezing and starving. Soviet intelligence reports say German soldiers are eating their horses, fighting over scraps of bread. And here, Soviet soldiers are receiving canned meat from factories in Iowa and Illinois, receiving it in quantities sufficient to feed entire divisions, receiving it while America simultaneously fights Japan across the Pacific, while supporting Britain, while feeding its own civilian population. "Sir," Private Morozov says, "what does America look like? I mean, to send all this?" Karpov doesn't know how to answer. None of them do. They know the official Soviet line. America is a capitalist nation helping defeat fascism. But that explanation doesn't match the evidence in their hands. Capitalists are supposed to be greedy, selfish. Yet here's a tin of meat that traveled 6,000 miles to feed a Soviet private in a frozen foxhole. "I heard," says Corporal Orlov slowly, "that in America even factory workers eat meat every day, that their farms are so productive they have surplus, that they throw away food because they have too much." "Propaganda," someone mutters. "Is it?" Orlov holds up his tin of Spam. "We are holding the propaganda right now." Silence falls over the group. Not uncomfortable, thoughtful. These are men who spent 18 months fighting the most mechanized, efficient military machine in history. They've seen German tanks, German aircraft, German logistics. They know what industrial power looks like when applied to warfare. And now they're seeing American industrial power, not applied to weapons, applied to food, to the unglamorous essential task of keeping soldiers fed. The Germans have better tanks, better tactics, better training, but they don't have this. They don't have the capacity to manufacture millions of tins of food and ship them across the world to allies. Private Pavlov, the former printing factory worker, picks up an empty spam tin and examines the bottom. There's a production code stamped here, a date code. This tin was manufactured in September, 3 months ago, in America. He looks up. They made this, put it on a ship, sent it across the Atlantic, probably dodging German submarines, then up to Murmansk, then by train and truck to us, in 3 months. The Germans can't even get food from Ukraine to their front lines, and that's 100 kilometers. The Americans shipped this from another continent. Karpov watches his men process this information. They're not politicians, not strategists. They're frontline soldiers who live day to day, focused on survival and the next objective. But even they can do the math, can understand what it means when one side has limitless resources and the other is slowly starving. Eat up, Karpov orders. Get some rest. We move forward at dawn. The soldiers disperse, carrying their tins of American food back to their positions. Karpov remains with Sergeant Resnick, watching the supply truck prepare to leave. "Do you think the Germans know about all this?" Resnick asks. "Some of them must. The ones who've captured our positions, who found American supplies in our trenches. They must know. And what do you think they think when they're eating horse meat and we're eating canned ham from Illinois?" Karpov doesn't answer immediately. He looks west toward German lines shrouded in winter darkness. Out there, Wehrmacht soldiers are cold, hungry, running low on ammunition and fuel. Their supply lines are stretched to breaking. Their factories are being bombed by American and British aircraft. And here, Soviet soldiers are receiving canned meat from factories in Iowa and Illinois, receiving it in quantities sufficient to feed entire divisions, receiving it while America simultaneously fights Japan across the Pacific, while supporting Britain, while feeding its own civilian population. "I think," Karpov says finally, "they're starting to realize they can't win. Not against this. Not against a country that can fight on 3 continents and still have enough resources to keep us fed."
January 28, 1943, Moscow, Red Army Logistics Command Headquarters. Colonel General Andrei Khrulev sits at a desk covered in ledgers, manifests, and reports. He is chief of Red Army Rear Services, the man responsible for feeding, clothing, and equipping the largest army ever assembled. Before the war, logistics was an unglamorous posting. Now, it's the difference between victory and defeat. His office is cold despite a wood stove in the corner. Fuel is precious. Everything is precious. Except, apparently, American food. Major Yevgeny Smirnov enters carrying another stack of shipping manifests. Smirnov is 34, an accountant before the war, gifted with numbers and the ability to see patterns in chaos. "The December convoy reports," Smirnov announces, placing the papers on Khrulev's desk. "Final tallies from Murmansk and Archangel." Khrulev opens the first folder. His eyes scan the numbers, then stop. He reads them again, more slowly. "This says the Americans delivered 150,000 tons of provisions in December alone? That's not possible." "It's verified, sir. Cross-checked with port records and distribution logs. 15 ships made it through. Average cargo 15,000 tons each, though some larger vessels carried more." Khrulev stands and walks to the map covering one wall. It shows the Soviet Union, the Eastern Front, supply routes from American ports to Murmansk, from Persian Gulf ports through Iran to the Caucasus. Red pins mark distribution depots. Blue pins mark frontline positions requiring supply. "Show me the breakdown," Khrulev orders.
Smirnov opens his notebook. December deliveries included 45,000 tons of canned meat products, primarily the Spam product, but also beef stew, pork and beans, various other proteins. 30,000 tons of flour and grain products, 15,000 tons of sugar, 12,000 tons of fats, butter, lard, vegetable oils, 8,000 tons of powdered and condensed milk. The remainder was dried eggs, cheese, coffee, and what they call sundries. Khrulev does the math in his head. That's enough to feed, what, 2 million men for a month? Approximately, sir, assuming 1,800-calorie daily rations, which is below the American standard, but above our current field allocation. The Colonel General returns to his desk. He pulls out a different folder. Soviet food production reports. The numbers are classified, known only to senior leadership. They're not encouraging. Our own agricultural production, Khrulev reads aloud, has declined 38% since 1940. Ukraine is under German occupation. That's where most of our grain came from. Our meat production is down 62%. Sugar production has collapsed. We're harvesting winter crops with women, children, and men too old to fight because every able-bodied male is at the front or working in weapons factories. Yes, sir, Smirnov says quietly. Without American food, Khrulev continues, what would our frontline rations look like? Smirnov doesn't need to consult his notes. He's run these calculations. 600 grams of bread per day, sir. Maybe 200 grams of grain porridge. Occasional dried fish or preserved vegetables. No meat, no fats, no sugar. We'd be looking at 1,200 calories daily, maybe less. Malnutrition would become widespread within 2 months. Combat effectiveness would degrade severely. And with American provisions? We can maintain 1,800 to 2,000 calories. Include protein sources, fats, vitamins. Keep the army combat effective. Khrulev sits back in his chair. The wood stove crackles. Outside, Moscow goes about its wartime business. Factories running triple shifts. Women working the jobs men used to do. Children as young as 12 operating machinery. Here is what I don't understand, Khrulev says. The Americans are fighting Japan in the Pacific. They're supporting Britain. They're building up forces for an eventual invasion of Europe. They're feeding their own population of 130 million people. And somehow they have enough surplus food production to send us 150,000 tons per month? The reports from our embassy in Washington suggest greater capacity, Smirnov offers. American agricultural production has actually increased during the war. They've mechanized farming to a degree we can barely comprehend. One American farmer with a tractor can work land that would require 50 Soviet farmers with hand tools. Khrulev stands again, pacing. Show me the projections. If American deliveries continue at this rate, what do the numbers look like over the full year? Smirnov flips pages in his notebook. Conservatively, 1.5 million tons of food provisions in 1943 could be as high as 2 million if convoy losses decrease. That's in addition to the vehicles, aircraft, weapons, and industrial equipment they're sending. And their cost? They're not charging us, sir, not directly. Lend-Lease is officially a loan, but payment is deferred until after the war. In practice, Smirnov trails off. In practice, they're giving it to us, Khrulev finishes, because they've calculated that keeping the Red Army in the field, keeping Germany fighting on 2 fronts, is worth more than the money. That appears to be the strategic thinking, yes. Khrulev returns to the map. His finger traces the supply routes, across the Atlantic, dodging U-boats, through the Arctic to Murmansk, under constant threat from German submarines and aircraft based in Norway, or the southern route, around Africa, through the Persian Gulf, up through Iran to the Caucasus. The logistics alone, Khrulev says. Do you understand what they're doing? They're maintaining supply lines that span the entire globe. they're coordinating shipping schedules across 3 oceans. They're manufacturing goods on such a scale that they can supply multiple allies simultaneously while building up their own military forces. Yes, sir. The Germans couldn't do this, Khrushchev continues, his voice taking on an edge. At their peak, with all of Europe under their control, they couldn't maintain supply lines 500 kilometers long in Russia. The Americans are maintaining supply lines 6,000 kilometers long, and they're doing it better than we supply our own forces from our own territory. Smirnov says nothing. They both know he's right. Khrushchev picks up one of the shipping manifests. It lists the SS Richard Henry Dana, Liberty ship, departed New York December 8th, arrived Murmansk December 29th. Cargo, 12,000 tons of provisions. One ship, 3 weeks, 12,000 tons. I fought in the revolution, Khrushchev says quietly. I believed in the socialist system. I believed we were building something superior to capitalism, that our planned economy would outproduce their chaotic markets. He sets down the manifest. And then I see these numbers, and I have to ask myself, if socialism is superior, why are we dependent on capitalist America to feed our army? Sir, Smirnov begins, concerned. Such thoughts, spoken aloud, could be dangerous, even for a colonel general. Relax, Major. I'm not questioning our government. I'm simply observing reality. He taps the manifests. The reality is that American industrial capacity exceeds anything we imagined. Their farms are so productive, they have surplus while fighting a two-front war. Their factories manufacture at scales we're only beginning to understand. And they're doing all this while maintaining a standard of living for the civilian population that we can't match even in peacetime. What do we do with this information? Smirnov asks. We continue distributing American provisions. We continue running the supply lines. We make sure every soldier at the front knows that America is supporting us. He pauses. And we've remembered this. After the war, when people want to know how we won, we tell them the truth. We won because America fed our army while we fed our factories with Soviet steel and blood. Major Smirnov gathers his reports. At the door, he stops. Sir, there's one more thing. The soldiers who receive these American provisions, they're asking questions about what America must be like, about how a country can have this much abundance. What are they concluding? That we may have underestimated the Americans, Smirnov says carefully. That a nation capable of this level of industrial production is not a nation that will lose any war it chooses to fight. After Smirnov leaves, Colonel General Khrushchev sits alone in his cold office. Through the window, he can see Moscow's skyline, the Kremlin, the damaged buildings, the city that barely survived 1941 winter. Out there, Soviet citizens are enduring unimaginable hardship, rationing, deprivation, loss. And somewhere in America, in places called Iowa and Illinois and Nebraska, farmers are growing so much food that they can fill ships and send them across the world. Factories are canning meat at rates that seem physically impossible. An entire continental economy is running at full capacity, and it's still producing surplus. Khrushchev opens the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside is a tin of Spam that somehow made its way to headquarters. He's been keeping it, studying it like an artifact
From an alien civilization. He opens it now using the key mechanism. The meat inside is perfect, uniform, impossible. He cuts a piece and eats it. It tastes like victory. American victory, Soviet victory, the victory of industrial capacity over military skill. He finishes the tin. Then he returns to work, calculating how to distribute 150,000 tons of American food across 6,000 kilometers of front line. May 8, 1943. The Kremlin, Moscow. Evening. Joseph Stalin stands at the window of his private office, smoking his pipe.
Outside, the sun sets over Moscow, a city that has survived, that has endured. Below, workers stream from factories that never stop. The Soviet Union is still in the war, still fighting, still, against all odds from 2 years ago, winning. On his desk sit reports from the front. Kursk. The Germans are preparing another offensive. Intelligence suggests it will be the largest tank battle in history. Soviet forces are ready, dug in, waiting. They have the equipment now, the tanks, the artillery, the aircraft, and they have the food to keep the soldiers fighting. There's a knock at the door. Vyacheslav Molotov enters, foreign minister, Stalin's most trusted advisor. Behind him, Anastas Mikoyan, People's Commissar for Foreign Trade, the man who negotiates with the Americans and British. "You wanted to see us, Comrade Stalin?" Molotov asks. Stalin gestures to the chairs. They sit. He remains standing, pipe smoke curling toward the ceiling. "The American ambassador has been asking for a meeting," Stalin says. "Harriman wants confirmation that Lend-Lease supplies are being used effectively. He wants reassurance that Roosevelt's generosity is appreciated." "The Americans are always concerned with appreciation," Mikoyan observes. "They want gratitude." "And do they deserve it?" Stalin asks. The question hangs in the air. Molotov shifts in his chair. "The Lend-Lease statistics for the first quarter of 1943 are significant. 400,000 tons of provisions, 15,000 vehicles, 2,000 aircraft, artillery, ammunition, industrial equipment. The quantities exceed our most optimistic projections from a year ago." Stalin moves to his desk. He picks up a folder. Classified logistics reports that Colonel Krylov prepared. He's read them multiple times. The numbers are undeniable. "I received a report last week from a frontline commander. He wrote that his men had captured a German position outside Stalingrad. In the German trenches, they found soldiers who had starved to death, literally starved. The Wehrmacht, supposedly the most efficient military in history, couldn't feed its own troops." He sets down the folder. "Meanwhile, our soldiers were eating American canned meat." "The contrast is striking," Mikoyan agrees carefully. Stalin turns to face them. "I want you to understand something, both of you. What I am about to say does not leave this room. It will not appear in any report, any speech, any official statement. Is that clear?" "Yes, Comrade Stalin," they respond in unison. "Without American production, we would have lost this war." Silence. Molotov and Mikoyan exchange glances. Stalin never admits weakness, never acknowledges dependence. But here, in private, he's stating the unthinkable. "Our industrial capacity was devastated in 1941. We lost Ukraine, our breadbasket. We lost Belarusia. We evacuated factories under German fire and reassembled them in the Urals, but production collapsed. We were producing tanks and aircraft, yes, but we couldn't feed the workers in the factories or the soldiers at the front." He picks up another report. This is from Krylyov. He estimates that without American food deliveries, our frontline rations would be 1,200 calories per day, possibly less. Combat effectiveness would degrade within 8 weeks. Malnutrition would become epidemic. "But we did receive American aid," Molotov points out. "Roosevelt committed to Lend-Lease." "Because Churchill convinced him to," Stalin says. "Because the Americans calculated, correctly, that keeping us in the fight was cheaper than fighting Germany themselves. They're not being generous, they're being strategic."
Does the motivation matter? Mikoyan asks. The result is the same. We have the supplies we need. Stalin returns to the window. Below, Moscow pulses with wartime activity. Factories running night shifts, women operating cranes and lathes, children working in ammunition plants. The Soviet Union has mobilized completely, sacrificed everything, turned the entire nation into a war machine. And it's still not enough without American help. When the war ends, there will be a reckoning. The Americans will expect payment, or influence, or something. They always do. But that's a problem for the future. For now, we need them, more than I ever wanted to admit. The projections for 1943 suggest even larger deliveries. The Arctic convoys are running more frequently. The southern route through Persia is becoming more efficient. If current trends continue, American provisions could reach 2 million tons by end year.
2 million tons, Stalin repeats. Do you understand what that represents? That's not military aid. That's not a huge shiploads of equipment. That's an industrial nation deciding to feed another nation's army while simultaneously fighting its own war on two fronts. He walks to a map on the wall, the global map, showing all theaters of war. American forces in the Pacific, island hopping toward Japan. American forces in North Africa, preparing to invade Sicily. American bombers flying from Britain, hitting German factories. And supply lines stretching across the Atlantic, across the Arctic, through the Persian Gulf, all converging on the Soviet Union. The Americans are fighting Japan across the entire Pacific Ocean, Stalin observes. They're supporting Britain. They're building up for an invasion of France, eventually, when they get around to it. They're maintaining supply lines that span the entire planet. And they're doing all this while their civilian population eats better than any people in history. Their agricultural productivity is unprecedented, Mikoyan confirms. Our analysts estimate that American farms produce 3 times more per acre than Soviet collective farms, using 1/10 the labor. Their mechanization, their fertilizers, their hybrid seeds, everything is more advanced. And their factories, Molotov adds. The automotive plants they converted to military production, they're manufacturing aircraft faster than Germany can shoot them down. One factory in Michigan produces a bomber every hour, every single hour. Stalin absorbs this. He spent his entire political life building socialism, arguing that the planned economy would surpass capitalism. And now, in the most crucial test, capitalist America is outproducing the Soviet Union by orders of magnitude. There's something else, Stalin says quietly. Something I've been thinking about. The German soldier is well-trained, well-equipped, experienced. He's been winning battles for 3 years. He believes in his cause, however twisted that cause may be. He's motivated. Yes, Molotov agrees, unsure where this is going. But he's also hungry. He's cold. His supply lines are broken. His factories are being bombed. And he knows, every German soldier knows by now, that the enemy he's fighting is being fed by a nation on the other side of the world. A nation with unlimited resources. A nation that can afford to ship millions of tons of food across oceans while fighting multiple wars simultaneously. Psychological impact, Mikoyan says, understanding. Exactly, Stalin confirms. The Germans thought they were fighting the Soviet Union, poor, backward, disorganized Russia. They thought they could blitzkrieg to Moscow, that we'd collapse like France did. What they didn't account for was fighting the Soviet Union plus American industrial might.
They are not just fighting our soldiers, they're fighting American food, American vehicles, American equipment. They're fighting the combined industrial capacity of two continental powers. He returns to his desk, sits heavily. The pipe has gone out. He doesn't relight it. Tell Ambassador Harriman that I want to meet. Tell him I wish to express the Soviet people's gratitude for American assistance. Use those exact words, gratitude. Molotov looks surprised. Stalin doesn't do gratitude. What message should we convey? The truth that American aid has been crucial to our war effort, that Soviet soldiers appreciate the provisions they receive, that the supplies are being used effectively to destroy the fascist invaders. He pauses. And tell Roosevelt, through Harriman, that history will remember America's role in this victory. Will you put that in writing? Mikoyan asks. No, Stalin says firmly. It will be verbal, private, between allies. After the war, we'll emphasize Soviet sacrifice, Soviet heroism, Soviet victory. But here, now, in this room, we acknowledge reality. We're winning because our soldiers have the strength to fight. And they have the strength to fight because American farmers in Iowa are growing enough food to feed them. Molotov and Mikoyan stand to leave. At the door, Molotov pauses. Comrade Stalin, one question. When the war ends, when we've won, how do we explain our dependence on capitalist aid? How do we reconcile that with socialist principles? Stalin considers this. We don't explain it. We minimize it. We focus on Soviet production, Soviet sacrifice, Soviet victory. The American contribution will be a footnote in our histories. He meets Molotov's eyes. But between us, here in private, we know the truth. We know what would have happened without them. After they leave, Stalin sits alone in his office. The sun has fully set now. Moscow is dark, save for the dim lights allowed during blackout conditions. Somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the Soviet Union, millions of soldiers are eating American food, driving American trucks, fighting with Soviet courage, sustained by American abundance. He thinks about Roosevelt, sitting in Washington, making decisions that affect the entire world. Roosevelt, who committed America's productive capacity to defeating fascism even before Pearl Harbor forced their hand. Roosevelt, whose factories and farms are proving more decisive than any weapon. Stalin opens his desk drawer. Inside is a tin of American Spam. Someone in the Kremlin staff thought the general secretary should see what the soldiers were eating. He's kept it, unopened, an artifact of this strange alliance. He opens it now, using the key mechanism. The meat inside is perfect, processed, abundant. He cuts a piece with his pocket knife and eats it. It tastes like survival, like the price of victory, like the knowledge that the world's first socialist state is being kept alive by the world's most successful capitalist economy. He finishes the piece, then wraps the tin and puts it back in the drawer. There's work to do, always work to do. The war continues. The Germans are preparing their Kursk offensive. The Americans are still delaying the Second Front. The alliance with Britain and America is fragile, based on shared enemies rather than shared principles. But the food keeps coming. The trucks keep rolling. The ships keep sailing through U-boat-infested oceans. And Soviet soldiers keep fighting, sustained by American abundance that proves whatever the ideology, industrial capacity determines destiny. Stalin returned to his reports, planning for tomorrow's battles, building toward eventual victory. A victory that will be celebrated as purely Soviet. A victory that will, in private, always be partially American.
July 17th, 1945. Berlin, the Potsdam Conference. The war in Europe has been over for 2 months. Nazi Germany is defeated, occupied, divided. Soviet flags fly over the Reichstag. American and British forces control the western zones. The alliance that won the war is already fracturing, already showing the cracks that will become the Cold War. But on this day, during a break in negotiations, something remarkable happens. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the Soviet Union's greatest general, the man who defended Moscow and led the final assault on Berlin, sits with American General Dwight Eisenhower. They're outside, away from the formal conference rooms, sharing cigarettes and speaking through interpreters about the war they just won. "Your Studebaker trucks," Zhukov says, "they were invaluable. We could not have maintained our mobile operations without them. The Germans had better tanks, perhaps, but we had better logistics." Eisenhower nods. "Logistics wins wars, always has." "There is something else," Zhukov continues. He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Your food, the spam, the canned goods, the powdered eggs. Our soldiers, they could not believe the abundance. Many of them had never seen such provisions." "We're good at manufacturing," Eisenhower says modestly. "It was more than manufacturing," Zhukov insists. "It was," he struggles for the right word, "overwhelming. We are a large country with vast agricultural land, millions of farmers, and yet America fed our army better than we could feed ourselves." This is the closest any Soviet marshal has come to admitting the full extent of Lend-Lease's impact. Eisenhower understands the significance of the admission. "You did the fighting," Eisenhower says diplomatically. "We just helped with the supplies." "You did more than help," Zhukov replies. "Without American production, the war would have lasted much longer. Many more would have died." He meets Eisenhower's eyes. "This is not something I can say in official statements, but here, between soldiers, it is the truth." They smoke in silence. Two generals who commanded millions, who shaped history, acknowledging debts that politics will soon erase. 3,000 miles away, in a warehouse outside Leningrad, former Sergeant Major Grigory Antonov, now a civilian again, walks through rows of surplus supplies. The war is over. The victory is won. And there are still crates of American provisions stacked floor to ceiling. He opens one at random. Inside, tins of spam, labels faded slightly, but still perfectly preserved. Manufactured in 1943. 2 years old, and still good. Still edible. That's the miracle of it. American food that doesn't spoil, doesn't rot, doesn't require constant attention. Antonov survived the war, survived Leningrad's siege, survived 4 years of frontline service. He's 49 now, looks 70, but he's alive. Many aren't. Of the men he served with in 1941, less than 10% survived to 1945. A young supply officer approaches, Lieutenant Sokolov, who was a private when Antonov first met him in late 1942. The boy who tasted his first spam in that frozen warehouse and couldn't believe it was real. "We're cataloging surplus for distribution to civilian populations. There's enough here to feed the city for months," Sokolov explains. "And after that?" Antonov asks. "More arriving from other depots. The Americans kept shipping until the very end. Even after Germany surrendered, they completed contracted deliveries." Sokolov picks up a tin. "I calculated it once.
Total American food aid to the Soviet Union, over 4.4 million tons. That's enough to have fed our entire Red Army for the duration of the war. Antonov does the math in his head. That's... Sokolov finishes. Incomprehensible. Yes, that's what it is. Incomprehensible abundance from a country that was never invaded, never occupied, never experienced what we experienced. They walk through the warehouse together, past crates of canned meat, powdered eggs, flour, sugar, past American trucks waiting to be redistributed, past the physical evidence of industrial capacity that won the war as surely as any tank or artillery piece. What do you think America is like, Sokolov asks quietly, to have sent all this? Antonov has thought about this question for 3 years, since that first day in 1942 when he opened a crate and found rows of identical tins, each one representing abundance he couldn't comprehend. I think, Antonov says slowly, it's a country we couldn't imagine if we tried. A country where even the working class eats meat daily, where farms produce so much surplus that they can feed multiple nations while fighting multiple wars. The newspapers say capitalism is failing, that socialist production is superior. The newspapers say many things, Antonov replies carefully. But I was there. I saw what arrived. I saw Soviet soldiers, starving, exhausted, at the edge of collapse, revived by American food. That's not propaganda. That's reality. They reach the warehouse exit. Outside, Leningrad is rebuilding. The siege is over. The dead are buried. The survivors are trying to remember how to live without constant fear. Will we remember this? Sokolov asks. After the official histories are written, will anyone know what American aid meant? Antonov looks back at the warehouse, at the towering stacks of supplies that represent a debt that will never be publicly acknowledged. The soldiers will remember, he says. Every man who ate Spam in a frozen foxhole, every driver who maintained an American truck, every logistics officer who watched the convoys arrive, will remember, even if the history books don't. October 1947, Omaha, Nebraska. Hormel Foods Corporation factory. J. Hormel, president of the company, walks through the production facility where Spam is manufactured. The war has been over for 2 years. Spam production has decreased from wartime peaks, but the product remains popular, a staple of American diets, a convenience food that defined an era. A reporter from the Saturday Evening Post accompanies him, doing a feature on American industry's transition from war to peace. During the war, the reporter asks, how much Spam did you produce? Hormel checks a clipboard. Peak production was 1943. We manufactured approximately 150 million cans that year. About 60% went to military contracts, American forces, British forces, and Soviet forces through Lend-Lease. The Russians ate Spam? Millions of cans, Hormel confirms. We received letters from the Soviet Purchasing Commission placing orders that seemed impossible. Hundreds of thousands of cases at a time. We had to expand production, add shifts, train new workers. At our peak, this factory was producing a can of Spam every 2 seconds. Did you ever think, the reporter asks, about the soldiers eating your product, about what it meant to them? Hormel stops at a window overlooking the factory floor. We received a letter once, forwarded through military channels, from a Soviet soldier, had to be translated from Russian. He wrote that American canned meat saved his life during the winter of 1943, that he'd been wounded, couldn't move, and survived for 3 days in a shell crater eating Spam directly from the tin until medics found him. Do you still have the letter? Framed in my office, Hormel says. It's a reminder that we weren't just making food. We were keeping people alive. American soldiers, British soldiers, Soviet soldiers, people who would have died without reliable nutrition. The reporter scribbles notes. There's been criticism that Spam represents everything wrong with American food culture: processed, artificial, mass-produced. Mass-produced, Hormel repeats. Yes, that's exactly the point. We developed processes that could feed millions, not hundreds or thousands, millions. When the war started, military planners told us they needed protein sources that didn't require refrigeration, that could survive transport across oceans, that could be eaten without preparation. We gave them that, and in doing so, we helped win the war. They continue the tour, past quality control stations where random cans are opened and inspected, past the
labeling machines that stamp production dates on every tin, past the loading docks where trucks wait to carry cases across America. The Soviet Union recently criticized American aid, the reporter mentions, said Lend-Lease was minimal, that they won the war through their own efforts. Hormel's expression hardened slightly. I have production records, shipping manifests, bills of lading. Between 1942 and 1945, this company alone sent over 90 million cans of Spam to the Soviet Union. That's not minimal. That's not insignificant. That's enough protein to feed their entire Red Army for months. Will history remember that? I don't know, Hormel admits. Politics has a way of rewriting reality. But the numbers don't lie. The shipping records exist. And somewhere in Russia, there are millions of men who survived the war eating American food. They remember, even if their government doesn't want to acknowledge it. April 1975, Moscow. Former Lieutenant Boris Karpov, now 62 years old, sits with his grandson, Mikhail. The boy is 12, learning about the Great Patriotic War in school. His textbooks emphasize Soviet heroism, Soviet sacrifice, Soviet victory. They mention Lend-Lease in a single paragraph: minimal assistance from capitalist allies. Grandfather, Mikhail asks, what was it really like, the war? Karpov considers the question. He's an old man now, a pensioner, living in a small apartment in a city rebuilt from ruins. The Soviet Union is a superpower: nuclear weapons, space program, global influence. The war is distant history, filtered through official narratives. Cold, Karpov says finally. The war was cold and hungry and terrifying. But you won. You defeated the fascists. We did, Karpov agrees. Soviet soldiers fought with incredible courage. We paid an enormous price: 20 million dead, cities destroyed, an entire generation sacrificed. The Americans didn't help much, Mikhail recites from his textbook. We won on our own. Karpov is quiet for a long moment. Then he stands, walks to a closet, rummages in the back. He returns with a metal tin, rusted, dented, very old. The label is faded, but still readable. Spam. Manufactured 1943. What's that? Mikhail asks. American canned meat, Karpov says. I carried this through the final year of the war. Kept it as a reminder. Why?
Because, Karpov says carefully, the textbooks don't tell you everything. They don't tell you that American food kept us alive, that American trucks carried our supplies, that American aircraft flew in our skies alongside Soviet planes. But listen to me, Karpov interrupts gently. I'm not diminishing Soviet sacrifice. I fought alongside heroes. I watched brave men die defending their homeland. But I also ate American food when I was starving. I rode in American trucks. I saw American supplies arrive month after month, year after year. He holds up the tin. This represents something your textbooks won't teach you. It represents a nation on the other side of the world deciding to help, sending millions of tons of supplies, asking nothing in return except that we keep fighting. Teacher says the Americans were just protecting capitalist interests. Maybe, Carpon concedes. Probably. But their motivations don't change the reality. Without their food, without their vehicles, without their industrial support, we might still have won, but it would have taken longer. Many more would have died. Mikhail examines the tin with new curiosity. Can we open it? No, Karpov says firmly. This stays closed. This is history. Physical proof of what happened, even if official histories choose to forget. He puts the tin back in the closet, on a shelf where it will remain, a small artifact of a war won through courage, sacrifice, and industrial abundance from a distant ally. The story of Lend-Lease food aid is written in numbers that stagger comprehension. 4.4 million tons of provisions, enough Spam to give every Soviet soldier 1 can per week for the entire war. Enough flour to bake bread for millions. Enough sugar, butter, eggs, and meat to sustain the largest army ever assembled. But the real story isn't in the numbers. It's in the Soviet soldier eating canned meat in a frozen foxhole and realizing someone across the ocean cared whether he lived or died. It's in the logistics officer watching ships arrive and understanding that industrial capacity decides wars. It's in Stalin's private admission that victory required American abundance. It's in the small tin of Spam kept for decades as proof of something official histories would minimize. The Soviet Union won the Great Patriotic War through courage, sacrifice, and determination that history rightly celebrates. But they won it eating American food, driving American trucks, sustained by American production that proved more decisive than any weapon. History remembers the battles. The veterans remember the cans.